Hi, welcome back. I'm Soudy Khan, Director of User Experience at Neuron, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about designing for the automotive environment, and actually some of the things that are tangential to the automotive environment. Honestly, there's so much information to cover, I could probably spend 2 days talking about this, but in the next 5 or 10 minutes, I'm just trying to bring up some salient points, get you kind of thinking along the lines of the complexities and opportunities for the automotive environment. Because I believe that very soon, this will be the next frontier that will grow exponentially through cars that are smart, connected, self-driving. So there's a lot of opportunity here, and I think it's going to be a space that's clearly larger than the tablet space today. You know, you can imagine at a minimum, we're going to have tablets and other things connected to the car, and we're going to have tablets within the car or similar type of devices. First, I want to talk about the history of electronics and entertainment in the car. So if you think back 40 years, 50 years, you know, this right here is probably what a car stereo looked like, your typical American car. There weren't many options. It was something that came standard with higher end cars like Lincoln and Cadillac, and otherwise was an option. After that, we got into what was called the DIN standard, and that's a German body of standards. The DIN standard, often referred to as just a DIN car stereo, technically is a DIN 75490. But what that means is kind of a standard size for the height and width and depth of a car stereo. So stereos like the one here. And that was something that we saw throughout the early 80s all the way to about the mid 90s. And it was fantastic. It was fantastic for consumers because we had a lot of competition. And if you go to Best Buy today or something like that, you can still see these CD players with a lot of features, high reliability, brand names, whether, you know, Blaupunkt or Kenwood, Pioneer, Panasonic, Sony, Alpine, for well under $100. And we have what's now called the double DIN standard, which is basically the same width, but twice the height. Although in reality, there aren't a lot of people manufacturing for that. Some things like Ford looks like a double DIN, but it's actually not. So what happened is that while it was great for consumers, from the car manufacturer's point of view, it wasn't the best idea, right? So they went back to the kind of car stereos and infotainment systems you see today, like this one. And unfortunately, because of the long development cycles of cars and the fact that the manufacturer now controls it, you kind of have this option, their standard or their higher end one. And it's really more of a branded marketing thing that's happening with a lot of brand names just licensing their name to the stereo systems that really aren't that involved in the development. But the automotive manufacturers can now control this. Good for them, not so good for the consumers. There are some advantages of integration, but I think overall, you're getting less bang for your buck. And again, because of the long development cycles and the high markups, you're not really getting the best thing you can get. However, now we're looking at a kind of a new market that's emerging. We're looking at companies like Google with Android, introducing Android Auto. So things are going to change over the next 3 to 4 years, and I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity. And you might ask, well, why would someone like Google want to get into this? Why might we want to get into this space? Why might Google want to do or create and help to create self-driving cars? Well, if you sleep 8 hours a day and you work out 8 hours a day and you have 8 hours left to be clicking, potential hours to be clicking, and then there's everything else that you have to do. Well, according to Harvard Health Watch, the average American spends 101 minutes per day driving. So that's 101 minutes where you could be clicking. So, over an hour and a half, over 25%, I would say almost 25% of the time that you have as free time where you could be clicking, you're spent driving. So imagine for companies like Google, if they can open that market up. And of course, when you're driving, often, even if you're commuting, you're buying gas. But if you're not commuting, you're going to Starbucks, you're going to Target, you're going to Walmart, you're going shopping, you're going for entertainment, you're going to the movies, you're going for dinner, you're going to a hotel, you're going to travel, you're going to go, be a tourist, right? So there's so much commerce tied to driving. That again, if you can control that market, or if you can have sort of your fingers in that pie, it's something that's going to be huge, and that's why a lot of big companies are interested in it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next few years between, are we going to go to a standard like Android, or we're just going to have a couple players in there, perhaps something from Android, something from Apple, or are we going to have sort of an open environment where people can sort of create lots of things? But that's where we start getting into the UX of things. And I would say, and this is the most important point in designing for the automotive environment, is safety first. I think people are really underthinking safety in the automotive environment. But if you look at this, if you look at the number of people killed per year in automotive accidents in the United States alone, it's over 30,000. So you can imagine since, let's say, 2001, if you look at the number of people who died through terrorism acts in the United States, and compared to the near 500,000 who've died in automotive accidents, you can't really compare the two. And I think if we are sort of careless in creating these applications for the automotive space, what typically happens is there will be some triggering event where someone's not paying attention, is using their smart car in a way they shouldn't be, and there's an accident. People get riled up about it, and they sort of call for government to come in and regulate. That's probably going to be the worst thing, because governments are bureaucracies and they tend to be slow. So we really have to think about safety first as UX designers. So that would be the first thing. Second thing is misconceptions. AAA and the University of Utah did a study and found that voice, because a lot of people think, oh, voice is the answer. Well, voice as it is today is actually more distracting than interacting physically with the device, because you can't really have a natural conversation. If you can imagine, if you're speaking to voice commands, you have to think about what you're going to say. You have to be accurate in what you're saying. If it doesn't understand what you're saying, you become very frustrated. So that's actually, and there are sort of human expectations to the time limits of a conversation, and limitations that have been put on by the voice commands. If you stop talking for a few minutes when you want to concentrate on driving in the middle of a conversation with your car that's not going well, that's not a good thing either. So again, that's something to look at. That's one misconception. Another misconception, or I think the wrong direction that people went, is to go completely flat screen. Haptics, feedback, human factors tell us that while touchscreen is good, we really need that feedback, and a combination of physical controls and flat screen is probably best. So you're still going to need the physical controls as well. Beyond that, we have to think of all the different modalities. This isn't just context. Think about the fact that you might be planning a trip, preparing to drive, actively driving, or passively driving. So let's look at these four things. So let's look at planning a trip. So now in the connected car, I might have my tablet in front of me and my wife might be looking at where to go for our trip over the weekend, right? So we can look at things and we can say, okay, we want to go here, and we just kind of flick that over to the car. So now it's in the car is prepared to go in the morning. It knows where we're going. It knows to warm the car up. It knows to maybe give us some information that we might want, like what's the weather at the destination and so on. So that's kind of planning for a trip. Now, preparing to drive is more the act of actually getting in the car and setting the seats and doing all those things, putting the kids in the car, whatever you might be doing, packing things. That's all part of sort of, preparing to drive. And of course, a lot of that is going to be automated. It's going to know, who you are, beyond just the memory 1, 2, 3 of the seats, right? It's going to kind of detect who you are, perhaps by your smartphone being with you, or even if there's a couple people, by sensors in the seats detecting your weight they might have sort of grabbed when you were in the car by yourself. And those sensors are already there. Not as precise, but they can provide that information, right? Because we have that to know when there's maybe a smaller passenger in the front seat to turn the airbag off. So those sensors already exist. There's actively driving. So this is when you're actually kind of going down, driving along and you're moving, and then there's passively driving. So maybe you're stuck at a standstill in traffic, or you're at a long red light, or in the future, you're not driving at all. The car's driving itself, right? So that's one set of considerations. The other thing is you have to think of who's in the car. and what information they want to get. So that's more contextual information. Am I the driver? Am I the passenger, front passenger? Am I the rear passengers? Driver should be about safety first. The front passengers are about navigation, consumption. The rear passengers are usually about entertainment, right? Connecting with friends, streaming information, keeping the kids busy, whatever that might be. But we also have to face the fact that more often than not, just by looking at the commuter lanes, people are driving by themselves, right? So they might need to be entertained to a certain level. They might need to be navigated if they're not familiar with where they're going. And of course, safety first if it's a driver and driver alone. And then we have context. So if you're going to serve up information, you have to know the time, location, and intent, right? And this changes dynamically in a car, right? So you're constantly changing location. The time is relatively constant, but the location and the intent, where the user is heading, that changes things again dynamically. I'll just give you one simple example. If a person is driving down a lonely stretch of Highway 5 and they're by themselves and they've been on the road for 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, the system would know they're not commuting. It might give them much different information if they ask for things around them, in sort of a safe space. Maybe they pulled over for gas, or maybe they've got a passenger with them and that passenger can look at things. They're going to serve up different information based on that, as opposed to someone just driving to work, right? They're probably not looking for a hotel, but the person who's been on the road for 8 hours, they probably are looking for a hotel, especially if it's depending on the time of day and how often that car is driven late at night, right? So the system can kind of determine, well, they don't work the night shift, right? So anyway, that's just a little bit of the information about designing for the automotive environment. There's a lot of things to consider. And again, I'm hoping that we consider safety first. And again, there's a lot of opportunities, not to mention, all the other physical affordances that are in the car, the steering wheel, heads-up displays, and everything else. Thanks a lot for watching. Take care.